Boker Tov and Shavua Tov. We begin this week after an introduction last week. We begin to speak about the great rabbis of the 20th century. And it's going to be difficult if I would hear myself. Thank you. Thank you. So we begin today with Rav Elchanan Wasserman, also known as the Kovetz Shiurim, after the name of his famous sefer, of his famous book. Now, as we are getting closer to our own times, there is a special type of a challenge in this shiurim that did not necessarily present itself, or at least not to such a degree, when we spoke about earlier periods and ages. Why? Because as any Jewish leader is doing, we can say, is working on two different planes. One is the Torah, the eternal Torah that he produces, the chidushim, the tshuvot, everything that he does, the chidushei Torah. And the other plane is, of course, being a Jewish leader. And being a Jewish leader would be to apply the Torah as he sees it into the way that the Jewish, not only a certain place or a group, but he obviously, if we speak about great Jewish leaders, then we speak about people that were trying to give remedy and trying to give guidance to the whole nation. And there are some times in which you find a Rav that his Torah is a bright star that is part of what is guiding our learning and our teaching to this day, generation or two after. But on the other hand, the
now, so for everybody to
but on the other hand, the political position that he took is very far removed from the one that maybe I myself, and I would guess many of those sitting around this table, are comfortable with. And if when you speak about people from earlier times, then the gap in history more or less mutes these disagreements. So the political, which is the more time-bound, falls aside, and the Torah, which is eternal, stays. But when we speak about events that are in our very living memory, or our father's living memory, then it makes it much more difficult to ignore or to drop to the side these political differences. But maybe that's in itself is a great lesson that we can take from these figures that we are going to speak about, because he is not going to be the only one in whom we would have such a problem, although he's one of the extremists. So let's begin. Rav Elchanan Wasserman was born in 1875 in a place named Birj, which is in the region of Baranovich. Baranovich is a very known Jewish province in Lithuania. Back then, it was not Lithuania, it was Poland, I think. In the age of 15, his father, he was from a nice Jewish family, obviously very observant, very Orthodox, you call today family, but not necessarily a rabbinical family. His father's name was Naftali. They called him Naftali the Shamash because it seems that he worked as the Shamash of the shul. In one of the biographies that I read as I was preparing for this shiur, they said that his father was a classic example of one of the Lamed Vav, or the 36. Now, I'm not sure what does it mean when they speak about the 36. Obviously, they speak about the 36 hidden tzaddikim. What does it mean to be a classical 36? You'd believe that one of the Lamed Vav is not someone that you can identify and say he's a classical Lamed Vavnik. So obviously he was not a Rav, but if his son was Rav Elchanan, then obviously he was a tzaddik. So I guess that's how they came to the conclusion that he is a classical Lamed Vavnik. But obviously he was around the shul, he was the shamash of the shul, he was learned to a degree, and it was very important to him. It is clear from from the path of his son, that is also very important for him that his son would be given the best Torah education there is. So, in the age of 15, his family moved to Boysk. And in Boysk, his father decided Boysk was somewhat more modern community than Birj, where he was born. So his father didn't want him at the age of 15 to be wandering around in such an open environment. He decided to send him to Telz. Telz was a very important yeshiva at the time. And one of the important teachers, the head of the yeshiva, was Rabbi Eliezer Gordon, also a very known figure. And the important Ram, the important teacher, Torah teacher in the yeshiva, was Reb Shimon Shkop. Reb Shimon Shkop is a very important name in the world of Torah learning, in Lithuanian Torah learning. He was a student of Reb Chaim of Brisk that we did speak about in, I can't remember, I guess a year ago. And Reb Shimon Shkop developed further the analytical shita system of Talmud learning, of learning Gemara, that began with Reb Chaim. And Rav Elchanan Wasserman, in the age of 15, comes to the yeshiva, and he has very good chemistry with Reb Shimon Shkop. He becomes a very strong student of Reb Shimon Shkop, to the degree that the wife of Reb Shimon Shkop told much later that all of the students in the yeshiva gave her a hard time because she couldn't get her husband, to give her any time. He was always busy with the students. But she said there was one student that was worse than everyone else. That was Rav Elchanan Wasserman. He would just chase her husband to everywhere that he went and won't let him breathe. So that was the degree of connection that was created between them. It is also extremely interesting and very telling that when he was in the Telz yeshiva, he was learning Talmud and Gemara, I guess, 20 hours out of 24. But an hour or an hour and a half a day, he was also learning German, learning Russian, and all of that we have, being that's in the Haredi biography. It's very interesting of Rav Elchanan. So he was learning German, he was learning Russian, he was reading Kant, and he was reading Russian newspapers. Now, that in itself was not so strange. Many students in this type of yeshivot would learn Russian, German, read newspapers, read philosophy, but virtually all of them knew that if you are doing such things, you must keep them in secret. That is not something that the yeshiva sees as a good thing to do. It's being frowned upon. Now, in some yeshivot, it would be immediately thrown away. In other yeshivot, they were more willing to turn a blind eye. But Rav Elchanan would come with these books into the Beit Midrash. And so he began to learn German in the Beit Midrash out loud. So because of that, the yeshiva doubled down and prevented other students that up till now they were allowed in the darkness to learn German. Now everything was stopped. So these students came to him and they said, "Why do you make trouble for all of us?" And he told them, if it is something that it is allowed, then it should be allowed everywhere. If it is something that is problematic, then we should not be learning it anywhere. Okay. And then a few days later, he came into the Beit Midrash with a Russian newspaper. The mashgiach, the supervisor, saw him coming, and you saw enraged that he ran to him, took the newspaper from his hands, and ran to the Rosh Yeshiva. So many times the punishment in these type of places, either, again, you'd be thrown away. If you're not immediately thrown away, there would be you'd be put a fine. So you'd need to pay money for the transgressing of the yeshiva rules. That is something that fell to the side nowadays. But that was the minhag back then, and I guess the students were poor enough, so such a punishment would really make them change their ways. So Rav Elchanan is now going to the Rosh Yeshiva, and he says to Rosh Yeshiva, first give me back my newspaper. And the Rosh Yeshiva says, we are speaking about fining you in a hefty sum, and you speak with me about a newspaper that cost a nickel. So Rav Elchanan told him, halacha is halacha. First, the newspaper is mine. Later, if I need to pay, I will pay. They came to the conclusion that he would be allowed to read the newspaper as long as he is doing it before the Seder begins. And it became his minhag. He would walk into the Beit Midrash with a Russian newspaper before the time of the learning, sit down, make a quick review of what he thinks is important for a Bachur to know, and then he would close the newspaper, stuck it in his pocket, and sit down to learn.
Decision because it was in Russian or because it was exposing them to ideas outside of the
It's the same for them. It's the same thing. For them, it's the same thing. I would guess that at least in some yeshivot in even the United States nowadays, there would be a similar outlook. Right? Learning English in more than just the practical way that you need in order to speak in the street would be again frowned upon. Why do you find what do you find out there, right, that you need to learn or to read from what they write?
There's also the attitude that you shouldn't use a smartphone, for example, because it exposes you to...
Yeah, that's right. That's right. With the obvious differences, but yes. So now you would think maybe after this story that Rav Elchanan was some type of a liberal rabbi, very far from it. But two things here are very important. One is that he thought from a very young age that what he learns in the yeshiva, he should find ways to apply into the world. So it's important for him to know what is going on. The second thing is that he has a very maybe dichotomic way of looking. If it is mutar, if it's something that should be done, it should be done. He shouldn't be hiding doing that. If it is something that is non-kosher, then it shouldn't be done anywhere. And he would make a point out of that. That is very important, and we'll see how that theme would be developed later in his life. At interesting side point, at 1895, in the city of Boysk, where his parents still live, Rav Kook becomes the rabbi of the city, and we have testimonies that from time to time, when the young Rav Elchanan would come back to his parents' home in order just for vacation or something, he would go to hear a shiur from Rav Kook. This nice relationship would not last for long, but it's a very interesting side point. At 1897, so he's 22, and he's going to a summer resort. It was very, back then, it was the minhag that on the summer you'd go, there would be like small cities of resort, and not only the rich, but also people of mid-income would go there and have a better weather and enjoy the summer. So he meets there Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. So up till now, he was learning by Reb Shimon Shkop, who is the student of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. Now he's meeting the great master himself. And he is, again, there is a very strong click between them. And he moves to Brisk to learn, do not misname, right? Boysk is one place and Brisk is another. It's like for us, I guess, Chadera and Telmond and Talmon. Right? So they also are allowed to have their own quirks. So they have Boysk and Brisk. And he's going there, is becoming also a student of Reb Chaim. There would be, in his later books, later Sfarim, he would quote Reb Chaim many, many, many times. So even that he learned there only for 2 years, he kept in contact with Reb Chaim and received a lot of Torah from him. Also, he would say many times, and even he printed it in a few places, that he heard from Reb Chaim that the role of our generation is not to say chidushim, novel things in Torah. That ended in the time of the Rishonim, of the early commentators. Our priority should be just to understand what they said. Now, at first glance, it seems to you as a type of maybe of demeaning or degrading our learning. But what he really is trying to describe here is the shift in focus of Torah learning. Because in Torah, I'm giving now in a very gross terms, but there is one way of learning in which you are creating, you are asking a question, you are giving it teirutz, so you are building new building blocks, new floors, if you want, in the palace of Torah. There is another way in which you are trying to look into the foundations and not necessarily trying to build a new, but trying to understand the old. And that was the type of Torah learning that Reb Chaim Soloveitchik was developing. And it seems that Rav Elchanan Wasserman was one of, we may say, the best disciples, the best students that exactly had the handle, caught what exactly Reb Chaim was trying to do. So again, that was the sentence that he would use a lot, obviously in Yiddish, so I am not able to repeat the original coin, but it was, we are not here in order to create a new, we are here in order to understand the old. But as it happened to be, it seems that understanding the old created many, many new outlooks on Torah. In 1899, he is getting married. So that's the age of 24. In Lithuania, it was not so, or if you are a Hasid, right, so the age of 24, you are really an old man. But for a Lithuanian guy in the yeshiva, 24 was just a proper age. So in the age of 24, he's getting married with the daughter of Rav Meir Atlas, another Torah giant, a very important Rav of a city called Shavel, which was a big, big Jewish community in Lithuania. So he has a daughter named Michla, or Michla, I'm not sure how it's being pronounced, I apologize. And he married her. And after a few years that he's learning by his father-in-law, he is getting a few suggestions, job proposals. And here is something that would repeat later, and it is very important. He got a rabbinical position proposal from Moscow, a very important Jewish community, not necessarily Torah-wise, but importance-wise. Gvirim, important people lived there, and it was an influential position because that was a city important in Russia. It was not the capital back then, but it was a very rich city, very important, and from there you could influence the Jewish settlement in Russia. However, he also got an offer to open a yeshiva in a very small place called Emichislev. It was not even a yeshiva for what we call today yeshiva gdola, right, for 18 years old guys. It was a yeshiva ktana, a metivta, the way it was called back, meaning it would be equivalent to our high school yeshiva. Obviously, no high school, only yeshiva. But the age is what we would call high school yeshiva. Now, it should have been a no-brainer. The rabbi of the Jewish community in Moscow is much more important. It is much more financially. It is, you would pay much more. And even in matters of time, you would have more personal time for Torah learning, for Torah growth in Moscow than in heading a yeshiva of young boys in this small place, Amechiselev. But he decides to go to the yeshiva. And here we can see the rising star of a new type of Jewish leader. He's not the first one of the type, but he is one of the bright examples. And that is the shift of Jewish leaders from what have been for 1,000 years of rabbinic community rabbis, which you could have been a rabbi of a small community, and then you'd be only influential in your own small community, and you can be of a greater community, and then you'd have greater influence. But almost always, not always, but almost always, with the great fame, we may say, of Rebbe, the great responsibility, came also a great rabbinical community position. However, things were changing. Now, things were in the change for almost 200 years. As I said, he was not the first one. We can think about the Vilna Gaon, which is another very good example of that, that carried no formal position. But he was also not a Rosh Yeshiva. Rav Elchanan Wasserman is one of these examples of the shift from communal rabbis into Rosh Yeshiva, which nowadays is almost everywhere. If you'd think, who are the leading rabbis in it, may be in Israel, it may be in the United States or anywhere else. It's not the community rabbis. They are not the leading authorities. The leading authorities are the rabbis of the yeshiva, the Rashi Yeshiva. Rav Moshe Feinstein may have a shul, but he was not important because he had a shul. He was important because he had his own yeshiva. And so many of the rabbis in the United States were students of his. Rav Soloveitchik was a rav in Boston. It was an important community, but that is not what made him important. What made him important was YU. And also here in Eretz Israel, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was not important because he was a head of a community. And neither Rav Eliashiv or almost any other rabbinic name that I can think about. Almost all of them were important because they led yeshivot, they had many students, and their students later spread and carried their legacy. So that was a great shift that happened because of the change in life conditions. Jews were no more limited to their communities. Jews were not only born and die more or less in the same place in which you were active throughout all of your life, and the same rabbi or his son would be your rabbis. Now you can go, in the beginning of the 20th century even, you would go to everywhere in Europe, there were yeshivot, and the yeshivot had almost nothing to do with the city they were located in. You just go to the best yeshiva that you think, or the best rabbi, or the rabbi that you can connect with, and he would be your rabbi. And then you'd go and live somewhere, and who is your rabbi? It may be that the rabbi of the city, specifically that you would live in, you'd have a good connection with, which is fine and nice. But who is the one that you are thinking about when you are asking yourself about your model? It is not your shul's rabbi. It is your Rosh Yeshiva. And Rav Elchanan Wasserman is one, as I said, of the brighter examples. And he almost, I would say, he knows that in the 20th century, the way to be influential, not because he wanted power, because he wanted to put into effect the skills that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him, so how he can be a better help to the Jewish people, not by being a rabbi in Moscow, but by chinuch. If there is one thing that the 20th century teaches us, is that it is all about education. And almost any other attempt to keep the Jews Jewish failed. The only way in which it worked is by creating day schools and yeshiva ketana, and yeshiva gdola. And then you can send, hopefully, you can send your the young man or even the young woman, because also it became apparent that you need the same thing also for women. So you can send the young boy or the young girl only after they fill their stomach with Torah and with faith and with emunah, and they would be able to, Be'ezrat Hashem, to withhold the onslaught of the modern world. It was just not the case in the 17th century or in the 16th century. That is different. It is one of the perks of the new world, of the modern world. So Rav Elchanan Wasserman understands that very well. He was also, by the way, a supporter of the girls Beit Yaakov, and he is going to the yeshiva, the small yeshiva in Amsichlev. And there he is being discovered not only as a great Torah scholar, as they all knew him at that point, but also as a master mechanech, a great mechanech, a great educator. And he had this very special and rare ability to be at the same time very strong-minded and leading by very strong example and not being afraid of demanding from the students, but in the same time being very human, very emphatic, very loving, very caring. This is a balance that is very, very hard to strike. There are many teachers that fall into one of these categories, either that is very demanding, but that creates a distance between him and the students, or that is very loving, but then the feeling is that maybe we can do whatever we want. And he was able to strike exactly this balance. There are many, many stories. He would have no problem. He would come into the shiur, and he was obviously a great, great teacher. And he had this ability to take a very complicated issue and explain it in very short and basic its basic elements. He would go, as I said, into the foundations. He would not look to add information and to confuse the students even more. He would look to go into the foundation of the daf or whatever they were learning, the halachic concept, and explain it from the beginning, from the mibereshit. And in very short words, very short sentences. To this day, we are using his sefer. It's called the Kovetz Shiurim. And we are using it, everyone can use it, but especially for young students, for beginners, because what is beautiful about him, it's very short. It gives you the basic idea and then let you play with it. With other rabbis, they would write, so if they have an idea, why not to do a 20 pages long article? And he would do all the work for you, and you'd have just to follow him throughout all of the masertot, and the student would come out confused. But Rav Elchanan Wasserman would give you that in a short paragraph, 4 sentences. And now, as a student, if you are a more skilled and advanced student, you would begin to apply it in different subjects. If you are a beginner, then you receive the foundation and you just retain it. So that was a great skill of his, the ability to not expand too much. Some of us are still in the process of learning it. If a student would sit in the classroom and Rav Elchanan would explain the concept and the student would not understand, then Rav Elchanan would see. If he's trying to understand, he would explain again and again and again. But if you will see that the student is not listening, is not paying care, then he would give him 1, 2, 3 strikes, and he's out of the yeshiva. So a student that is not listening in the shiur, you'd throw him from the yeshiva, which is, again, I think for us amazing. But the students loved him. You'd think that such a teacher, no one would want to sit in his classroom. But they loved him, and it made them work harder because they felt that it is because he cares about them. And if you are able, it's not to transmit this feeling. If you really feel that, and the students feel you feeling that, then that would create a bond. And that's what happened with Rav Elchanan. However, after a year and a half, he went back to his family just for the Pesach vacation. And then he received a telegraph asking him not to come back. Mm-hmm. Now, why did it happen? There are different accounts, so it's hard to know. It seems that there were 2 main factors. One was that he was more right-wing than the community in Amsichtlav. And the community had also a communal rabbi, which was more, I guess, in line with the community ideology. Now, the community wanted their rabbi to lead the yeshiva, and not this guy coming and leading the yeshiva with his right-wing ideas. So they were putting pressure. As long as he was there, the rabbi didn't want to throw the successful Rosh Yeshiva out. But when he was not there, it was easier to ask him not to come back. So that was one leading factor. The other leading factor, it seems, was, as in many other places, the government was trying to force the yeshivot to teach, you can call it limudei chol. Basically, it was Russian. Usually, that was the question of learning language. Now, he himself, you understand, had no problem with the students learning Russian, but he would not let the government to dictate what should be taught in yeshiva. Now, it was not only the government. It was always because there were some Jewish elements that were pushing, and they were telling the government, here there is yeshiva, they teach that, they don't teach that, and go in. So it comes back to the question of his relationship with the Kehila. He would not budge, and that is part of his character, as you, I think, already understood. He would not budge. Because if something is correct, it should be done. If something is not correct, it just shouldn't be done. He is not the man to go for, let's say that we are doing it, but we would not do it. If he believes that something should be done, that it's above the table. So he would just ask not to come back. He decides, because he's still very young, in 1904 is just 29. So that's a very young age yet. So he decides to stay a few more years and to learn, and he goes to Radin. In Radin sat the Chafetz Chaim, about whom we had a few shiurim, Rabbi Israel Meir Kahana, or Cohen, Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim has there a Koilel Kodshim. So they learn about the halachot of korbanot, of sacrifices, because Chafetz Chaim wants that when Be'ezrat Hashem, immediately the temple would be built, we need Kohanim that would know how to handle the temple. It would be very embarrassing if the temple would be built and our Kohanim would not know how, what are the laws of the Korbanot. So the Chafetz Chaim created this Kodshim Koel, and Rav Elchanan goes there. I am sure that he also learned very well Korbanot, but even more important, you can understand already that he very liked rabbis. So every rabbi that he would learn by, he would connect to. But the Chafetz Chaim, he was, from there on, he was the Rabbo Muvak, his master rabbi. And he would become, for many, he would become the successor of the Chafetz Chaim. Unfortunately, as you would see in the end of the shiur, it was very short-lived. But he would become the successor of the Chafetz Chaim. Just one story from his years in Radin. His youngest son, that he called after his own father, Naftali, was born while he was in the kollel. And his wife didn't live near the kollel, so he would just go there, I don't know, once a month. He would come back to his home, be his wife, and go. So he was sitting in the yeshiva, and he was learning with his chavruta. And the telegraph, the guy from the telegraph office comes into the yeshiva and hands him the telegraph saying that a son was born to you. They say that Rav Elchanan stood up, recited the Sheikhianu. He knew that he would not be able to be on time for the Bet Milah. So he said, there is no reason for me to hurry, sat back, and continued the learning from the point that he stopped. I guess that some days later, I hope that a few days later, went back home. But that's a story that his children write in the introduction to his Sefer. So that's a family legacy about him. In 1910, the Chafetz Chaim sent him again to be a Rosh Metivta, again a young children yeshiva. He knew, now he could be very easily the Rosh Kollel of the best kollelim in the world, no question about it. But it's clear that he wanted to be a teacher of a teacher of young boys, because he understood that that is the point in which you can affect them the most, when you can still shape their personality. So he became the Rosh Metivta in Brisk, which is the city of course, Reb Chaim of Brisk. So again, he's very happy, he's near his rabbis, and he can go and discuss things with them. And everything seems to chug along very well. Till in 1914, what happens, of course? First World War breaks. And it was very bad for anyone in Europe. It was very bad for him during First World War, but it was especially bad for Jews. Now, we do not remember it, of course, because צרות חדשות משקרות את הישנות. Second World War was so bad that you do not remember the First World War. But it was death and destruction everywhere for the Jewish world. And there was no money and starvation, extremely difficult. And in Eastern Europe, we should know that the war continued much later, even after Versailles, even after there was a peace arrangement. But because of the Bolshevik revolution and all the new states in the Eastern Europe, the borders were always moving from one side to the other. And you always suspect the population that they cooperated with the other side. Now, who is the easiest to identify and to punish for cooperating with the other side? Of course, the Jews. So there was a lot of suffering. Reb Elchanan had to flee away from Brisk. The yeshiva more or less disappeared. He's going back to Radin and then to a place named Samailovich, where again he opens a yeshiva. So that would be again and again in his life. He opens a yeshiva for young boys. His writings and his students' writing of his shiurim begin to circulate throughout the yeshiva in Europe, so he becomes renowned, very famous. In 1919, I'm beginning to go quicker. In 1919, he is more or less, it becomes more quiet. It's less of a war, but now the communists are taking control, and they have what is called the Yevsektia, meaning the Jewish section, the המחלקה היהודית, if you want, of what would later become the KGB. And these are Jewish guys, so they know the best, but they know the best how to stop Jewish life, because that's the goal. The communists, in their favor, you can say, in their merit, you can say that they had the same zealot against Christianity. So it was not special against Jews. But of course, it was a disaster. They destroyed Jewish identity. I think these things are well known. What didn't happen in 1,000 years of Inquisition and pogroms and persecutions, in just a few decades, Jewish Torah, Jewish learning, Jewish identity was almost completely uprooted. These are just, we unfortunately, we are dealing now with the outcomes. And they did it because, as I said, they had this Jewish Yevsektia, and they knew very well that what they should do is completely shut down the education system. Because just as Rav Elchanan Wasserman figured out that the way to preserve Judaism is by educating, they were able to figure out that the way to shut down Judaism is by closing all of the yeshivot. You can have a shul is fine. With a rabbi, you'd give a drasha. That's, of course, there would be spies that would check that in the drasha it doesn't say anything against the government. But you can run your shul. They had no problems with shuls. It's very interesting. Even much later. But no yeshivot, no education. And then the shuls would become something for the old guys to be in. And that's exactly what happened. And in the end, Reb Elchanan and the Chafetz Chaim decide that they need to leave the areas that are under the communist government and run to the west, back into Lithuania. Later, it's very interesting. Later, Rabbi Elchanan would comment. He would say that the Chafetz Chaim told him that it was a mistake they ran away, that they should have stayed there and fight. And it's very difficult to understand. He says many Jews would have been killed. So it seems that he spoke about fighting in open arms or something. But of course, meaning that they should have kept the yeshiva going on with all of the persecutions. That's more or less what Chabad tried to do for decades, but also for them. In the end, the Rebbe also had to run away from Russia. It was very difficult. It was very difficult. But the Chafetz Chaim felt it was a mistake that they left the scene, and they should have fight for the neshamot of the the Jews back then. Say, obviously, we are not in any place to judge anyone in these situations. So in 1921, they go to Baranovich. Back then, it was the Second Republic of Poland. Nowadays, it's part of Belarus. In Baranovich, Rav Elchanan stayed for the next 20 years, which we may see the prime of his life. Again, he opens the yeshiva, he had hundreds of students every year. These are thousands upon thousands of students that went through Rav Elchanan in Baranovich. And he sees, as I said, there are many, many stories how he sees the students as his own children. Again, I am quoting from the story of his son that survived. And his son says that once he needed a coat. Now, when you need a coat in Poland, you need a coat. Okay, it's not I'm wearing a coat because it was a few drops here. You need a coat. And he went to his father and he asked his father to buy him a coat. And his father said, I have 200 children here that needs a coat. How can I give one child of mine, not the others? And that's really the way that he felt. And again, that transforms. It goes. And the students felt it. And it was a very, very, very special connection between them. In 1926, again, the question, should I be a community rabbi or a head of a yeshiva, had risen. That's because his father-in-law passed away. And his wife really, really wanted to go back to Shavel, and he should take the throne, right, of his father-in-law. It would be so beautiful for everyone. It's a great community, a big community, very important, Chashuv Kehila. And he would be able to learn, he would be able to teach, he would be able to be a Rav Kehila. She would be able to be near her mother, that now is Almana, now she's alone, and support her. And also, they would be finally paid, because in Baranovich, everything was excellent, except one thing. They were all starving all the time. I just told you the story about the coats. There was no money at all. Situation, again, in all of Eastern Europe was terrible for everyone. And who would pay for the yeshivot? So he was always have to collect money, to go around, to schnorr. It was very not mechubad for someone like him to go schnorring everywhere. And she wanted them to go. And he should become the Rav of Shevel. And he said no. So she said, you have a rabbi, the Chafetz Chaim. Let's go. And that's the Chafetz Chaim. And I would accept everything that he would say. And the story goes that she prepared herself to go out and speak with the Chafetz Chaim. And suddenly she sees her husband standing in the corner of the house and crying. And she asked him, why do you go to the Chafetz Chaim and do what he says? He says, I know that you would tell me to go to Shavel, and I want to stay and be a Rosh Yeshiva. So she decided that she would let him stay. And I think that's also a sign of the special connection that they had between them. So he stays in Baranovich, and he becomes more and more influential, not only in education for these young children, but as I said, as the years pass by and the students that he taught become rabbis by themselves, so he becomes the rabbi of the rabbis, he's becoming to be more and more influential in political question and in leadership question. And here comes into play what I said earlier, and that is that he had a very strong worldview of, you may almost say, black and white. What is good, and what is bad, we should call out as bad. So, for example, a very strong example, if we see that Tzionim are not keeping Torah and mitzvot, that's an understatement, and many of them are outright against Torah and mitzvot. And they try to secularize the people. So that's obviously bad. And you should have nothing to do with them whatsoever. And he writes very strongly against the Zionists, and even more strongly against religious rabbis, religious Jews that cooperate with them. Because the Zionists, you can write whatever you want. They don't really care about what Rav Elchanan thinks about them. But the rabbis do care. So when he attacks them very sharply. And he writes things like, Tzionut is avodah zarah, because if you put something which is not God in the center of your word, that is a definition of Avodah Zarah. So if you are a religious Zionist, then you are Oved Avodah Zarah Beshituf. That means you are worshiping God together with another idol. So these are very, very sharp words, and many people were greatly insulted by them. He attacked very sharply and viciously Rav Kook. Other rabbis in the Aguda, I was a member of the Aguda, I became a member of Moetzet Gdolei Torah of the Aguda. Other members of the Aguda tried to, they told him you should be more mild, because in the end, even you're collecting money for your yeshiva. People that you insult are not going to give you money. He told them, if the purpose of a yeshiva was to collect money, then you are right. I should suppress my truth for the sake of collecting money. But the purpose of the yeshiva is not to collect money. The purpose of the yeshiva is to spread the truth. So I will spread truth. And if I'm able to collect money, I will collect. And that is the type of personality. It was extremely strong, extremely charismatic, extremely strong, but very strong-minded. And I'm now going to say something that is a speculation. I hope that it would not in any way be seen as chas v'chayil disrespect. We are speaking about one of the great Torah giants. I am learning from his words. I have his Sfarim in my home, so I want to be very clear about it. I do think there is a connection between being very good at teaching young boys and giving Torah, his ability to give Torah in very short and terse and very basic and foundational ways, which means that you have this ability to see the world in, it's not a dialectic, it's before the dialectic, it's dichotomy. Right? So you are able, so you learn a sugya, you are able to analyze the different factors in it. You are able to teach the students what is the right way, what is the bad way. But when you are always dealing with young students, you are not dealing with the complexities of life so much. I am asking myself, maybe he was extremely good at what he was doing. Extremely good. Again, he was, without him, who knows where the Torah world would stand. Maybe being a great Rosh Yeshiva doesn't necessarily mean you can be a great leader for the rest of the public. Maybe that needs someone else to balance. It's a question that I'm putting forth. However, be it as it may, in 1937, there is the great Aguda convention in Mariband. It's extremely famous. It's 1937. Many people begin to wake up and smell the coffee in Europe, and the smell is strong. And in the Aguda, they have a very pressing question, because in Eretz Israel at the time, Palestine, there is the Peel Committee by the British Mandate. Peel Committee, in the British Mandate. And the question is, maybe a Jewish state would be immediately established. It would be very tiny, it would only have the Galil and part of Tel Aviv, but a Jewish state would be established. Maybe. There are talks. So the British are also interested to know what is the opinion of the Aguda. So in 1937, there is a convention of the Aguda in Mariband. And we would return to this convention, I think, in the coming months many times, because every rabbi that participated there that was important, it's extremely important to know his opinion. Rav Elchanan was, I think, the extreme wing. And he was of the opinion not only that we should not support the establishment of a Medina Yehudit, which would be controlled by the Zionim. He thought it's asur to make aliyah. In 1937. So they asked him, but it's a mitzvah from the Torah. How can you say it's asur? He said, that is right. It's also a mitzvah to do Brit Milah. But if there are chas v'chalila, two of the brothers that died because of the Brit Milah, you do not risk the third child. So many of our brothers went to Eretz Israel and lost their soul. They become unorthodox. Right? They abandoned the faith. So if we see a mitzvah that when we do, people die, you do not attempt it again. That was his position in Mariband in 1937. Of course, when people asked him, should we make aliyah, that was his answer in 1936. It's very difficult to hear because, on the other hand, he was very pessimistic about the future of the Jews in Europe. In the end of 1937, after being in Mariband, he went to collect money in the United States. And he stayed there for 17 months. we could have a whole shiur just on his journey through the United States. Extremely interesting. He was able to collect $10,000, which is in our terms around 200,000. It's not bad, but I wouldn't call it an outright success. Again, the reason is clear. He didn't hide his positions. He thought it's very bad that Jews are going to America. And then he went there to collect money. However, although maybe money was not able to collect so much, his strong personality left such a remark on Jews there. Names maybe some of you would be familiar with. Menachem Mendel Feilovich. Menachem Febe Mendelovich. Irvin Bunim. And some other people that after the war, we'd speak Bezrat Hashem about it in the coming months. When Rav Kotler would come to the United States, he would find people that understand the idea of what we would call Haredi Judaism and would help him to create the yeshiva system as we know it. So he, knowingly, unknowingly, he put the seeds of what would later become the Torah world, the Haredi Torah world in the United States. So it was very important. Rav Heyman from Torah Vadat, he helped him to establish, I think, the yeshiva, or they helped him in the first years there. In 1939, just a few months before the outbreak of the yeshiva, he publishes, he's still in the States, he publishes a small booklet, 60 pages. In Yiddish, it was later translated to Hebrew. I guess that you can find it also in English. It's called Ikveta de Meshicha, in which he says, we see such troubles, and it is all because of our sins. We abandoned Torah, and that's why we are being punished. So we should know that, he says, if you throw a stone at a dog, he begins to bite the stone. But if a human being, if you throw a stone at, he should know that the problem is not with the stone, but he should ask himself, why am I being thrown stones by the one that throws? It says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu throws Stalin on us. He throws Hitler on us. The question is not Stalin or Hitler. They are just a stone. We should ask ourselves, why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing that? What are our averot? He says, our situation is dire because of our sins, because of the abandoning of Torah, because we do not educate our children for Torah. And if we would not repair our ways, chas v'chayila, we are standing in front of a major disaster in Europe. He says that, and then he goes on a ship and goes back to Europe. And the people in the now again, in 1939, you don't need to be a prophet to understand that if you're already you shouldn't go back to Europe. He told them, I cannot leave my children behind. He took aboard the ship and returned to Baranovich. As we know, a few months later, Second World War broke out. I'm skipping a lot of details. He began to flee with his students. Some of them returned home. Some of them he was fleeing with them. In the end, he found himself in Kovna, Lithuania. In the beginning, it was in the beginning, he was in places that were under the communists. Then he went to Lithuania, which was free. So it was the best place for Jews for 2 years, from 1939 to 1941. But then the Nazis occupied Lithuania, and many, many Jews that thought that they found refuge there were killed. I want to read to you the testimony of Rav Ashri on the last day of Rav Elchanan Wasserman. We have the testimony. There are different accounts, but this is the formal account. This is again printed in the introduction of his children. Two children were murdered with him, as I would say in a minute, but one very, very famous, Rav Elazar Simcha Wasserman. Maybe some of you know him. He was in America. He was very famous. So he published this in the introduction. I'm reading from this testimony, translated into English. These are the final words which Rav Elchanan spoke to his students when they were interrupted in their study of Masechet Nedarim and rushed off to sanctify the name of heaven with the surrender of their souls on the bitter day of Yud Aleph Tammuz 1941, Tafshin Aleph. Reb Elchanan spoke quietly with his usual composure. His voice was no different than always. He looked very serious, but altogether normal. He did not attempt to part specifically from his son Rabbi Naftali, who was with him, but spoke to one and all, to all of his Talmidim. He saw them all as his children. So even in this last, I know I think it's very moving. He spoke to all of them together. And he said, in heaven they apparently consider us tzaddikim, since we have been chosen to atone with our bodies for Klal Israel. Therefore we must repent wholeheartedly. Time is short, and Fort 9 is the place in Kovna. It's the name of the place where they were murdering the Jews. So Fort 9 is close by, so we have a very short time now. We must realize that our sacrifice will be accepted much more readily through teshuvah. It would be better, we are going to be sacrificed, so it would be better sacrifice if we would be pure, if we would make teshuvah. In this way, we'll spare the lives of our brothers and sisters in America. So that's the connection that he did. What he said to himself is that we must atone for our sins, because he saw what is happening as a punishment for the sins of Klal Israel. And he said, in order for the war, in 1941, no one knew where the war would come to. And in order to save them, and then if the punishment here would be, I don't know even how to pronounce it, but if we would repent enough, if we would understand the punishment when it happens here, there would be no need to repeat it in other places. So we will spare the lives of our brothers and sisters in America. We must not contaminate our offering through any impure thought, which would render it unfit. Just like a korban. When you bring a korban, you should not think machshavot pigul. We are now about to fulfill the greatest commandment that exists, Kiddush Hashem. The fire that consumes our bodies will be the very fire which will revive the house of Israel. And with that, they shot them all. They shot them all. So, when we try in any way to estimate such a great person, as I think we all understand, as I said, his Torah is being learned to this day. Just yesterday, part of just learning his Torah in order to teach it here, I also was preparing a sugya for my yeshiva students. I was opening a sefer because that's the basic of the basics. Even his ashkafa, although as I tried, I hope that I was chas v'chela not in any way disrespectful. Maybe there are disagreements. We see it different. I have my own rabbis, and I rely on them, on my ashkafa. However, his strive for truth and his understanding that we should not make a lie in our souls, I think can light our way, even if we do not see eye with eye exactly the way that he saw where the way should lead. So that's the values and the morals and the Torah, I think that we can learn from Rav Elchanan Wasserman. And I will meet you Bezrat Hashem with good health next week.
תודה רבה. תודה.